Hi, I'm George. Today, let's look at what is the consequence of rejecting God as the ultimate cause of all reality. Let's start with the basics, the physical reality. God is the ultimate cause of all physical reality. When we say that God is the ultimate cause, what we mean that He is the origin, the foundation, and the sustainer of everything that exists. Think of him as the cosmic architect who not only designs the blueprint but also brings the entire structure into being by merely speaking it into existence. As Romans 4 says, or as Romans 4 puts it, God calls into existence the thing that do not exist. In other words, where there was nothing, God spoke and there was something and everything. When God commanded, let there be light, photons didn't hurdle up and debate whether they should actually shine. No, they simply burst forth because when God speaks, physical reality listens and obeys. The very laws of nature that we study, admire, and sometimes barely understand are nothing more than the consistent outworking of God's will. Gravity doesn't pull objects towards the earth because it wants to. It does so because God told it to. Electrons whirl around atomic nuclei not because they are having a good time, but because they are following the precise instructions set by God's divine decree. Every atom, every molecule, every force of nature exists and behaves according to the command of the one who called them into being. There is no option, no room for rebellion in the physical world. You won't find quarks unionizing for better working conditions or the speed of light applying for a sabbatical. The entire universe operates under God's command without so much as a whimper of dissent. It is as if all of creation has one collective mantra which says, yes, Lord, whatever you say. This obedience is not out of fear, but out of necessity. God's word is the very definition of reality. The universe doesn't have a choice because without God's sustaining word, they would simply cease to exist. God's command are not merely suggestions that reality might consider if it is in the mood. They are the very fabric of existence. Now let's talk about goodness. When God created the world, He declared it is good. Not once, but repeatedly. He declared that it is good. Like a chef who just perfected a recipe and can't help but taste it again and again and taste the goodness again and again. It wasn't a casual pat on the back like the human chef. It was an authoritative declaration by the all sovereign whose work is not an experiment, nor who can err in his good work. God, being the very essence of goodness, imprinted goodness upon creation. Therefore, physical reality, as God created it, is inherently good because God declared that it is very good in Genesis 1. But now enters the Gnostic, these self-proclaimed spiritual elites who took one look at the tangible world and said, gross. For them, the physical world was like a bad hair day that wouldn't just go away. They believed that matter was evil, something to be escaped from, not something to be celebrated. It's as if they thought God had an off day or a bad day when He decided to create the material world. For them, it's like He accidentally mixed up His divine blueprints and mistakenly made Earth instead of, say, a celestial yoga retreat where everyone floats around in serene detachment. The Gnostic would have you believe that the physical world is a cosmic mistake, something that happened when the divine accidentally tripped over its own feet and spilled existence into the void. According to them, salvation comes from escaping the material world and merging back into some nebulous, undefined spiritual ether. From this nonsense springs the doctrine that we should escape this world to heaven. From this nonsense springs the idea that only the soul is valuable and the physical body is evil. Though Jesus rose with the same physical body, yet they don't value the physical. But Jesus, through his resurrection, valued the physical and promised us physical resurrection. How convenient is the Gnostic world? No responsibilities, no engagement with physical world, just permanent vacation in the realm of mystical nothingness. No doing the will of God on earth as it is done in heaven, only escaping to heaven. Who cares if his will is done on earth as it is in heaven? After all, escaping is more important, and this is his only will. That's what they say. Hence, proving Jesus' words as nonsense and false. Such are the people, even within the church, who call into question the actions and words of the Lord, who sustains everything by the power of his word. These are the people who would deny the application of the Old Testament moral law to the present world. But let's be real here. If the physical world is so evil, why did God bother to create it in the first place? Was he having a bad day? Did he lose a bet with an angel? The Gnostic view is quite insulting to the creator. It's like looking at the Mona Lisa and saying, the frame is so terrible. Let's toss the whole thing away. God didn't just slap together the universe like a Pinterest project gone wrong. He meticulously crafted it and then took a step back and declared it is good. And he said it is very good. To say otherwise is a blasphemous misunderstanding of the very nature of creation. The Gnostics, the self-proclaimed spiritual sages, who with the wave of the enlightened hand would have us abandon everything God deems important. Starting with justice. Justice? Poof! Who needs it? They scoff. After all, why bother with justice in this lowly physical realm when, in their opinion, everything material is rotten to the core? Never mind that God himself is called the judge of all the earth in Genesis 18:25. According to the Gnostics, we should just let injustice run rampant. After all, this world doesn't matter, right? Who cares if corruption thrives or innocent people suffer? Just keep your eyes fixed on the clouds and float away into spiritual nothingness. So they would say William Carey was wrong in taking action against Sati. I wish these Gnostics instructed Carey of better ways. Abolishing of slavery was so wrong according to them. We all should learn from such people that the gospel had nothing to do with abolition of slavery. We should all accept this teaching of such learned, enlightened people and rip away from the Bible Exodus chapter 20 verse 2, which says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So you see, according to them, we should rip away Exodus 22 and reject this God who sets people free. They say the Almighty was concerned back then in the Old Testament times, but now he has changed. And now maybe he has become an enslaver. Should we say that? So for such enlightened ones, legal action is wrong. Legal profession is wrong. Christians, take note. Please take their advice and quit all such professions. Justice, my foot, when God himself has given up justice in the present world, only to take it up again at the final judgment. Who are you to take action against injustice in the world now? And then comes the cherry on the top, toil and labor. Why bother working? The Gnostic says, wrinkling their noses at the mere thought of effort. Forget the fact that God himself worked to create the universe. Or that Jesus said, my Father is working until now and I am working, as mentioned in John chapter 5 verse 17. The Gnostic wants to sit back in their spiritual hammocks, sipping their divine smoothies while scoffing at everyone who actually believes that hard work honors God. According to their flawless reasoning, the Father and Son must have really misunderstood what being spiritual is all about. Forget building, creating, or even contributing to the good of the society. Just sit back, quit your job, and meditate on the inner light. I am sure the bills will pay themselves, right? According to these enlightened ones, Jesus was doing work of the devil when he worked as a carpenter. People with such opinion are called very spiritual Christians. That's the church we have today. Then we have the political thought, another Gnostic no-no. You see, the Gnostic, in their infinite wisdom, wants us to abandon any opinion or notion that God has a say in the governance of nations. Paul must have been seriously misguided when he said that God appoints the rulers and authorities as mentioned in Romans 13:1. And as for God redeeming people from every nation, tribe, and tongue, as mentioned in Revelation 7:9, that's just a minor detail, easily overlooked. The Gnostic says, why bother with nations at all? Why think about society or laws or governance? After all, they say, even if God is the Lord of the world, the church has nothing to do with it because the church's Great Commission is not about doing God's will in politics as it is done in heaven. By such talk, they want to behave as if God isn't the Lord over this world. But their preaching, philosophy, or behavior would not change the fact that God is still on the throne and that God is the Lord of the world. But what about economic pursuits? Oh, the Gnostics are scandalized by the idea. Fair trade, business ethics, providing for your family through honest work, and working hard? Nonsense. Haven't you heard? Money, trade, and economy, all evil physical things. So let's just pretend that God never said anything about fairness in trade or honesty in business dealings. I suppose we should rip out all these pisky passages from Exodus, Deuteronomy, Proverbs, and the prophets that discuss fair wages, honest scales, and treating workers well. For the Gnostic, it's better to be broke and be spiritually enlightened than to actually contribute to society through ethical work, thereby denying the Lord who demands fairness in all things. Now, these Gnostics don't care about rape, child molestation, abortion, or anything that involves this filthy physical world. After all, who cares if people are suffering in their material realm? These are mere earthly issues, far beneath the lofty concerns of our Gnostic friends. Now comes the medical service, which is a total no-no because we can't do it by Christian principles. Even if we do it by Christian principles, we should never call it Christian, they say. However, we should never mind that God is called the healer, as mentioned in Exodus 15:26. And Jesus was all about healing, both physical and spiritual. Nope. According to the Gnostics, we should let the body rot while we drift away into spiritual euphoria. Health, healing, all overrated. So we are forced to conclude there cannot be a Christian way of practicing medicine. Hence, there cannot be a Christian hospital. God himself is offended by such language, calling a hospital Christian. If a Christian cannot practice Christian medicine in a Christian way, then there is only secular medicine. God is not the Lord of this field. Hence, we are obligated to abandon it as a logical consequence. This is the outcome of such thinking. But let's celebrate this Gnostic enlightenment and abandon all medical practice. Christians, take note, we should not become doctors, nurses. We should abandon it because God is not the Lord of this field. And now let's throw up our hands in the air and give up studying the world, even though it's God's own creation. Why bother studying what God has made when we can leave education entirely in the hands of the devil? After all, who cares that Jesus was called good teacher, as mentioned in Mark chapter 10, verse 17? Surely he wasn't interested in education or wisdom, teaching, thinking, learning. None of that matters in the Gnostic worldview. We definitely shouldn't strive to implement Jesus's educational philosophy in this world because clearly Jesus must have been above such trivial matters. Why waste time on educating children when Jesus himself obviously didn't care about that, right? Let's go ahead and ignore all these commands about teaching these things to your children as mentioned in Deuteronomy 6:7. I mean, can you imagine God having an educational philosophy? Ludicrous, they say. Yet the scriptures do tell us that the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, as mentioned in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 25. But who needs that sort of foolishness anyway, which is wiser than world's wisdom? There's no such thing as a Christian way of studying or Christian educational philosophy according to the Gnostics. That's all worldly nonsense. So let's hand over our schools and universities to secular forces and to the devil. Because obviously, Jesus wasn't really a good teacher, isn't it? What a blasphemous thought, right? But hey, the Gnostics have spoken, and we all know their wisdom is far superior, even above the very God who created the mind, intellect, and all the tools of learning. And now the gospel, and this is the kicker. According to these enlightened ones, the only gospel that matters is the one that gets you to heaven. Who needs to live a life of righteousness, justice, compassion, or integrity on earth? Just sit around and wait for the sweet by and by. Logically, then, let's just abolish the police force, army, doctors, scientists, politicians, lawyers, judges, and economists. All unnecessary distraction from the true business of being spiritual. Why bother contribute to society when you can simply show up to a prayer meeting and underperform at your job to make time for extra spiritual devotion? According to the Gnostic, it's not about living your faith in the world. It's about withdrawing from the world altogether. Of course, these Gnostics forget one thing. Jesus himself worked in the physical world. He healed the sick, fed the hungry, and proclaimed the kingdom of God. He didn't float around in some spiritual fog, waiting to escape the evil material world. Instead, he engaged with it, redeemed it, and ultimately, through his resurrection, promises to restore it. But in the Gnostic logic, maybe Jesus himself was mistaken. Imagine the irony. Perhaps, according to them, we should declare that this God who places such importance on the physical world that he raises with the same body, we should declare this God as an evil devil, maybe according to them. How laughable. The Gnostic would have us deny the very God who created the world and called it good. They would have us overlook the fact that the way to heaven is by doing the will of God in the physical world through the physical means he has ordained by the power of the Holy Spirit, which is called sanctification. True spirituality, as Jesus demonstrated, isn't about escaping the physical world. It's about living out God's will in the here and now, just as it is done in heaven. And this we should do in every area, in our family, as individuals, in society, in the church, in our jobs, everywhere. That's what sanctification is all about. And every field is God ordained. And that's why God is the Lord of everything. And that's what it means, all authority is given to me. And that's what Jesus says before he gives the Great Commission. But alas, for the Gnostic, it's easier to dream of some far off spiritual bliss than to roll up their sleeves and get involved in God's redemptive work in the real world. Oh, yes, being involved in redemptive work involves only Bible study, prayer, and telling people about death and resurrection of Jesus. I'm not saying that this is not important. This is only the starting point. When people believe the resurrected Lord, that is only the starting point. And after that, we should go out and do the will of the Father as it is done in heaven. But the Gnostic would say Bible study, prayer, and proclaiming this good news is the only important work left out in this world now. All else is the work of the devil. Logically, all professions are corrupted. The only noble and God-honoring profession is to become a pastor, evangelist, elder, etc. Yet these Gnostics take money from people who have sinned and corrupted themselves by the devil's work in the world. So what shall we do? Should we discard physical reality? Not at all, because physical reality is not a mistake to be discarded. It's a masterpiece reflecting the glory of the Creator. Sure, sin has introduced death, which are smudges and scratches on the canvas. But the underlying physical world and the work of God, though dying, remains good. This goodness in the physical world should not be confused with the humans who are dead in their sin. This physical world, though dying, is good because it comes from God. Christians, therefore, are called not to reject the physical world, but to steward the remnant of goodness in the world, to recognize the goodness that God embedded within it, and to work towards the restoration, just like a God who will restore it all one day because of his son's physical resurrection. So next time someone tries to tell you that the physical world is evil and that we need to escape it, just remember God made it. He called it good, and his word is the final say on the matter. The Gnostic can keep their disembodied spiritual utopia. We will stick with the real world, the one that God created, sustains, and one day will make it perfect again because of the resurrection of his son, Jesus.